Good morning, everyone. My name's Pat Showalter. I'm the chair of the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Executive Committee this year. And I'd like to welcome you to our Friday, August 28th meeting. We have a very interesting agenda today. We'll start out with the roll call. Roll call, please.
Yes, thank you. Committee Chair Showalter.
Here.
Dr. Mekachek.
Present.
Klein.
Present.
Meadows.
Here.
Tyson.
Here.
Thank you. I'll note that currently Dr. Martinez Beltran is absent, but we do have a quorum of our committee.
There we go again. I'll get it. So the next item on our agenda is public comment on matters not listed on the agenda. So this is a time when the public may comment on anything that isn't on the agenda that they would like to share with us. Speakers are typically limited to 3 minutes. But I see we have one person, so if you need to talk a little longer, that's probably okay. No, oh, you don't, you were going to speak on so do we have anybody online?
No speakers online, Chair.
All right, so then we'll move on to the consent calendar. There are a number of things on this. No, the only thing on this is really the minutes. So who would like to either make comments on the minutes or make a motion, or both?
I'll make a motion after you take public comment.
Okay, we do have to take public comment. Does anybody want to make a public comment on the minutes? It's so rare, but you have to do it.
No comments from online, Chair.
All right, great. So now we go to a voice vote on the minutes. Can I have a
move to approve?
Thank you.
A second by Klein. Oh.
Okay, Mekachek moves, Klein seconds. So all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? Any abstentions? Okay, passes unanimously. All right, now we move on to the regular calendar, which is really the meat of this meeting. And we'll start with the CEO update.
Good morning, directors. Okay, so for CEO update, just a few things I want to highlight today. Unfortunately, Benna Chang, who is our expert on legislative matters, is in a legislative call with CalCCA staff. So I'm going to do my best to give you a quick update on what we're tracking and what we know as of this morning, because it changes at this point in the session, like day by day. So the one bill that we were most excited about in terms of happening this year is the Rogers bill, which is AB 1761. This is the bill that CalCCA basically wrote and Rogers sponsored it. That's the one where we would seek reform on PCIA data transparency. And so that one has, as I understand it, made it through and is on its way to the governor's desk at this point. So that's exciting. And then we've also been following closely 2 data center bills. And I'm not going to remember the numbers, but they're still being, I guess, workshopped. And so not sure how that's going to end up, what's going to end up going to the governor's desk on those. And then more recently, we've been tracking this wildfire kind of bill, and we're only tracking it just because we want to understand what's happening. Obviously, there's affordability implications one way or another, but obviously there's also a lot of implications on the wildfire bill for cities and citizens. And so we don't have a position, nor does CalCCA. We're just monitoring to see what happens. And then last this morning, Benna let me know that there is a solar balcony bill that is on its way to the governor's office. So we hadn't taken a position on this one, nor has CalCCA, but this would allow for apartment owners to install solar panels on their balconies. So we'll do a little bit of deep dive, assuming it passes or the governor signs it, and to try to understand what does it mean, what are some safety concerns, if any, what is our role in promoting these or educating our community about them. So we'll come back to you on that once it's, assuming it passes. So with that, that's the legislative update I wanted to highlight. And then I have a staff person on who's going to give you kind of a quick update on a recent proposed decision that the CPUC made on the PCIA, so the Power Cost and Difference Adjuster Track 2. And so there's been a little bit of a media push by CalCCA, mostly on LinkedIn, if you're on LinkedIn, about that decision or that proposed decision and its implications and what they intend to do. So we just want to make sure that you hear it from us, like what this is about and what we care about and our next steps on advocacy here. So with that, I'll pass it on to Adam Pierce, who's going to give you a quick summary.
Good morning, directors. Thank you, Monica. I'll speak quickly here on the update to track 2 in the PCIA. Next slide, please. So as background, there has been, first track of PCIA last year. Now we're on track 2 with track 3 set to begin shortly. But track 2 concerned the valuation of renewable energy credits in the PCIA portfolio. And again, a renewable energy credit is an accounting mechanism for a megawatt hour of electricity from a renewable resource, solar, wind, etc. And so when these resources are used and put onto the grid, you get a REC that certifies for RPS compliance that it was put onto the grid and used. But RECs can be banked for RPS compliance purposes. So these, what is under consideration here are RECs that were created from 2013 to 2017, were banked at that point and are now being used by PG&E for the current RPS compliance period. And of course, RECs that were banked in those years means that our customers helped pay for the creation of those RECs before they became SVCE customers. One note in the sub-bullet that these RECs can be used for RPS compliance, but because they are banked, they do not contribute to power content label results. So that's one key difference. So in this track, the CCAs argued that since departed load helped pay for these when they were customers, that departed load customers should be credited at the market price benchmark for PG&E's use of the RECs. So that would be credit through the PCIA, and that the market price benchmark is currently $71. The IOUs, however, argued that they are worth $0, presenting several arguments over settled law and that lack of PCL value and on other reasonings. Energy Division during the proceeding issued a staff proposal of 4 different options for pricing these RECs, and all the staff proposals were somewhere in the middle between the IOU $0 and the CCA's MPB. So all 4 kind of came down through the middle in some way, shape, or form. Next slide. The proposed decision, which came out a couple weeks ago, concluded that the value of these RECs is $0. So no value will pass to departed load via the PCIA. This was a surprising and disappointing result. I think largely because somewhat because of the staff proposal, where Energy Division had imagined that these all had some value somewhere. The financial impact to SVCE is hard to pinpoint because there are different outcomes where you could value them, and the MPV changes year to year, and a lot of expectation that the MPV is going to come down quite a bit. But the upper bound of the impact is $75 million to SVCE customers. Next steps here, oral argument. It's a bit of a scheduling unique event where there's going to be oral argument after a PD has come out, but oral argument will take place on Monday. I will be in attendance. Cal CCA had an ex parte with the commissioner and has also asked there and publicly for an alternative PD. An alternative PD would give some value to these RECs. It's no guarantee that the CPUC will issue an alternative PD. We expect the PD to be voted out on September 17th in advance of the October update in the ERA case. And because the status quo is that these are valued at $0, there's no impact to this year's PCIA currently. And so this is the end of my slide. If there are any questions, happy to hear them.
Okay. Director Tyson?
Thank you. What's PCL?
Power content labeling.
Okay, I should know that, but I didn't. I saw the $75 million. I saw the zero. How big a percent of the PCIA are we talking about? I don't know how much to care.
That's a good question. I would have to, I will have to look into that. I don't have a ballpark figure of how big the PCIA, like the above market costs on a year to year in aggregate are.
Yeah, I think the other thing too is that this is based on a historical PCIA, that they weren't valued when they were created, when the RECs were created, and so they valued them at zero. So it's not like it would impact future PCIAs necessarily, unless there's still a big supply of these unbundled RECs or these banked RECs. And I don't know if that's the case, Adam. Like, is this a one and done type thing? And once they resolve this, it's not going to be an issue, or do they have still a big supply of these unbanked RECs?
So this is potentially an ongoing issue. I mean, it's ongoing in terms of them having a bank. This would be settled if the decision stays in place. So we know that for this in 2025 that PG&E did use some of its bank. We don't know how much, because that was confidential, but they had almost 20 million of these RECs, and they used at least some of them last year. But the assumption is there's still a great number of these RECs in the bank. And so, next year, if the MPB came all the way down to say $10, then you're multiplying each of these RECs by 10 instead of 72. So that's where the valuation really fluctuates. But yeah, as Monica alluded to, I mean, this has been the status quo that they are $0. So, this is kind of like opportunity costs almost, where had we gotten a decision we liked, it would have benefited us in our favor, but this isn't technically, moving the ledger more negative, because this maintains the status quo.
Director Mekachuk?
Is this a zero-sum game between the CCAs and the IOUs? Like, do they balance out?
Yes, and any benefit to our customers would mean crediting, that adjustment to the above market cost. So it would come from bundle customers.
So who has more customers, the IOUs or the CCAs?
At this point, I believe in PG&E service territory that PG&E serves less than 50% of the TAC area. Like, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but just like in theory, what's happening though is that bundle customers are benefiting from the use of these RECs, right? Because this means that PG&E doesn't have to go out onto the market and buy, power or resources to cover their compliance. They're using products that were paid for partly by our customers for current compliance. So their current customers are getting a deal because they only paid a portion of these RECs, and our customers paid for a portion of these RECs, but our customers are now not getting any sort of compliance benefit from their use by PG&E.
Yeah, maybe just the big concern here is a one of principle, right? The PCIA was supposed to be one of neutrality. It was supposed to be indifferent between the bundled and the unbundled customers. And this is a clear example when indifference is not being applied. And in this case, even the CPUC staff recognized that there was a compensation due to the unbundled customers, that is the CCA customers. And so the fact that the proposed decision came out and ignored all that and ignored the principle of indifference is the real concern. So the dollar amounts are not insignificant, and if you add them all up for all the CCAs, they're quite big, but it's more about making sure to establish that this is wrong in the context of the PCIA. And as we move forward in track 3 of the PCIA, where we're arguing for reform, we want to make sure that we get on the record that indifference is really important to us, both ways. So I think that's the bigger issue.
So the ALJ decided against us in the proposed decision.
Yes.
Correct.
And it's the same commissioner and ALJ that will be governing track 3.
And where the thread that I was pulling on was affordability. And if it's a zero-sum game, then there's winners and there's losers, if you will. But where are the most customers? That's where I was going with that. Because I think politically it makes a difference. But Monica, your point is very well taken that, it's got to be indifferent. So be fair on both sides. And will the Rogers bill help CCAs to understand what's being banked and what the impact of these recs are on the PCIA?
Adam, if you can chime in perhaps. As I understand it, the Rogers bill is on a going forward basis, wanting to have transparency on what is going in to calculate the market price benchmark for the different attributes and therefore the PCIA. And to the extent that they continue to generate unbundled recs going forward, which if they do, then it's really on behalf of their customers, the bundled customers. I don't know if they would be subject to the future market price benchmark calculations. And maybe, Adam, you know a little more about that than I do.
I would say that for purposes of this, that I would imagine that the PG&E's bank would remain confidential, because that, knowing that kind of ties directly to their open position and their strategy going forward. So I would imagine, even if the bill were to pass, that the amount of recs in the bank would still be confidential.
Thank you.
Okay, the last thing on the CEO report. Sorry.
I have another question about this. So we don't normally take an action in this group on this kind of thing. But I wondered, when we talk about good governance, we are concerned with the quality of the governance of the power sector. And that's really what this body does, right? And the fact that we feel that we're being treated unfairly is actually a big deal. And so I hope that we will be arguing that transparency of this sort of thing and what's behind the decisions is an essential part of good governance. And it's owed to the people of California. And it's kind of one of the things that we pride ourselves on versus some of the other layers of government at the moment. So we're the political people. So I just want to make that statement that the good governance aspect of this, as you mentioned, that is never something to be discounted. Okay.
Yep. Heard you, and I think CalCCA shares those sentiments and is very much advocating on behalf of us.
Director Meadows.
So potentially, maybe this question is too simplistic, but was there a rationale suggested why they ended up at 0?
Yeah, it's described in the decision, and basically, the IOUs argued that by changing the status quo, that it would lead to unfair costs to bundle customers. And they also raised that, it was an untimely challenge by the CCAs, which we, vehemently disagree with. But, basically the commission, as it goes in these things, and, in any court in America, both sides make their arguments, and the decision maker chooses which argument they like better. And so here they sought that in their view, this maintains indifference, because had they changed the status quo, it would have imposed unfair costs on bundle customers. Obviously, we disagree with that, as we view the status quo as being inequitable to our customers. But that was, a very high level summary of their reasoning.
Thank you.
Okay.
No more questions, right? Okay.
All right, the last item is I want to remind you all that on August 31st, which is next Monday, we will have an air district meeting on air district rules around heat pump water heaters for elected officials, including all of you. We are co-sponsoring this event with the Cities Association, and it'll be here at City Hall in Sunnyvale at 5:30 p.m. We hope you all RSVP'd, and we'll see you there. So with that, I have nothing further on the CEO report.
Excellent, thank you. All right, so now we go on to item 3, which is the Integrated Decarbonization Roadmap Strategic Recommendation. And we will be, the speaker will be Zoe Elizabeth, who's the Director of Decarbonization Policy and Community Strategies. And this has been something I know we've all been working on a long time, so we're very interested in what you have to say.
Fantastic. Yes, thank you for all of the work that you have put in so far. So that we've said this a few times, but the roadmap, it is our long-term plan, our vision for how we can achieve our ambitious goals. It gives staff clear direction so that we can focus our efforts and helps to articulate the board's vision and priorities so that we are fully integrating that into our work. I'm just talking about governance in very much ways. This is part of our governance to ensure we're incorporating your direction, but also that we have a clear transparency as we move forward with our ambitious goals. This is an action item. We will be going to the board in October. So our request or our ask today is that you recommend the board of directors approve the recommendations that we will go through. And we'll be going through in October when we'll have time to incorporate feedback and input as well. This is a reference slide. Every strategic document's got lots of terms. If you get confused of where things are, you can flip back to this slide on your screen or in your packet to remember this is the order of operations from which things flow. And as we've said in previous presentations, but just important to remember, is that this is not a budget decision. We do budgeting now at the end of each calendar year, but we set the priorities and the recommendations here intentionally so that they can flex based on if budget fluctuations up or down. We're going to go into a lot of things that we have to do over the next 5 years. So good to take a breath and a pause and say we have done a lot since the formation of this agency. 100% clean energy, 9 out of 10 years, thousands of megawatts of new renewable energy, 1 million metric tons lowered because of electricity emissions, and thousands of heat pumps have gone in, right? That's really, really big progress. We've also learned a lot, and the next recommendations that you see here build off of feedback analysis, but also all of this past work. The roadmap in today's presentation is broken into 2 sections. The first is, I would say, a bird's eye overview of the very long process, so we can begin to see how we get there. And that's what we've spent the most talking about in previous presentations, so I plan to go through that fairly quickly. And then more detailed recommendations about the next 6 years. Okay. This is the goal that was set and adopted by the board officially in 2018. And it's time for an update. State rules have changed. SVCE has done more and grown. And so we want to reflect what we have learned and the updated context in which we operate. Jumping ahead. So our proposed goal, that the decarbonization goal, is to drive the SVCE region to fully electrify every building and vehicle by 2045 and to power it with clean energy. This proposed goal does 3 things. 1, it codifies the work that we have been doing. We focus on transportation electrification, building electrification, and clean energy. This makes that focus clear. you will see it doesn't include things like air travel emissions or deep industrial process emissions, which probably sounds obvious, but we think it's important to have that kind of clarity. 2, it makes our ambition clear, right? Every long-term decarbonization plan that I have ever read says that in order to sustainably get to long-term decarbonization, we need to electrify passenger vehicles and buildings, right? There's other things that will be offset and captured in different ways, but those sectors need to be electrified. And so by this goal, it says we are doing our part at SVCE to meet that mission. And then finally, it aligns with state goals that have been updated for carbon neutrality. Why is there a slide that is missing? That's okay. Oh, there it is, just got moved. Oh, no, I just got confused. That's all. Okay, the second thing that we are proposing, right, with the 20 years is a long time. Like any big goal, you need to break big steps into smaller chunks. And as we all know, you need to begin measuring what it is that you are attempting to achieve. And so here we are proposing appliance and building level targets that will help us track progress towards our long-term goals. So in summary, the recommendation here is to replace the 2018 goal with this updated goal and to add building, appliance, and passenger vehicle targets. We can't do everything. I say that every presentation that I do on this, but where we can make the most impact is by emphasizing the 4 areas in which we do work, which are clean energy supply, catalyzing local government capacity, and serving as a customer and community resource, and advancing thought leadership. All of the recommendations that we will go through in some way attached to one or more of those areas of influence. Okay, so we have done a lot. We know where we need to go. And so it's now to say, this is where we are. The challenge, we've seen this slide probably many times, but I'm just going to name what is right here, right? The region is not on track to meet that 2030 emissions target. There's a big drop, and then emissions plateaued. And this is my clear expectation setting slide. Deep decarbonization will not be linear. Even though every chart in most plans looks like the one that I showed you before, this smooth line with incremental progress all the way down to 20 years, in reality, it will be more likely to be a series of plateaus and steep ramps, maybe even bumps up from year to year, depending on what is going on. To achieve kind of real decarbonization requires structural change. It requires focusing to really drive down costs so that over time, incremental change can become exponential. Real transformation is messy. It's another way to say that. The other piece is adoption is still really early. This is the same slide, but just shows the percentages. So if you just look at water heaters, we're at about 2% right now. We want to massively increase that by 7-fold over the next 6 years. But even that amount will be just a blip on those overall emissions, right? So we won't see those drops come until we're much farther along on the adoption curve. Still, if we take a strategic and phased approach that focuses on reducing friction and building the structural capacity, we can have a make long-term big changes. I want to point out 2 things because we looked at these slides the last time I was with you. And one of the questions that was asked is, I want to understand what sectors go first. Is this residential, non-residential? Where do the hardest to electrify fit in? So I highlighted that on these slides. I'm happy to answer more detailed questions here. But in this next phase, adoption really will be driven by residential. That's where the technology is ready. That's where the market is most interested. And it's also where SVCE has the most level of influence. We imagine adoption growing in the non-residential sector, more towards the early to mid 2033s or 2030s. I'm happy for it to be surprised, but that's what it looks like at this point. And then we imagine in the kind of late 2030s to early 2040s, when the electrification of those really hard to electrify sectors takes place. So that's things like restaurants, high temperature processing in buildings. The other thing I want to make a note of is that a significant amount of the gas use in non-residential buildings is from commercial cooking and from high temperature process heating, right? And so that's part of the reason that we'll see more action in the earlier years on the residential sector, because the technology is just more available and ready. So in summary, this section is meant to tell you how can we track progress when progress is so uneven, right? How can the board and our advocates and staff know when things are a plateau versus we're just stuck? And we think by, again, having a clear, focused goal, quantifiable targets, and building a phased approach, we can begin to do that. And then by identifying specific recommendations for each of those phases, we can really begin to move. And that's what brings us to the more specific recommendations for this next phase, again, which we call develop. We've had several conversations about principles. These are the board set guidance, stakeholder set feedback that directs everything for the rest of the recommendations. They probably look pretty basic. They look obvious to us. And in some ways, that's because they are very SVCE specific. They are how we think and how we value things. They would look very different if we were at another agency. But this work has been very instructive and important in developing the next set of recommendations. So to move the region from develop, deploy, we recommend focusing on 4 specific areas. So the fundamental first thing that we do is deliver clean energy. Rising load from electrification, from AI data centers, combined with tightening regulations, market uncertainty, are straining this path. It's making that harder. You've heard that a lot from Chris and Marin, right? Fundamentally, meeting those clean targets will still be the kind of prudent portfolio management that Chris and his team do on a daily basis. That's the majority of the focus. However, we recognize that in these tightening conditions, it's important that we have an all of the above approach. And so the recommendation here, it's not exactly new, but it's a growth and a development in some work that we've been doing a bit more informally. And it's built off of kind of 3 things. 1, we need more supply over the coming years. 2, supply closer to demand can theoretically make good economic sense. There's value to doing that. 3, again, theoretically, and we're going to hear a lot more about the practicalities of this in the next presentation, but the cheapest megawatt is the one that you don't build. If you can reduce energy use or you can move it around, again, theoretically, that's the best thing that you can do. And so this priority is about creating a process to really integrate more fully our load planning to begin preparing for this large load, and then use our position as a local agency to identify places that make sense for local developments, and then that are based on incorporating stakeholder feedback and input. And then, of course, quantifying the feasibility and economic viability of potential projects. It's about quantifying the real value of demand flex, and then potentially scaling and implementing these options when they make sense. The second priority, and like every one of these slides, these you could write 2 or 3 dissertations on each of them, and I'm sure something has been. But the fundamental issue with electrification is that it's too expensive right now, right? We cannot scale. We cannot get electrification and heat pumps into every home until we really bring down particularly the upfront costs. And so what we are saying here, and this is a doubling down. It's not something new or an addition, but it's really a doubling down to focus our efforts on driving down those costs and taking a multi-pronged approach. That looks like contractor engagement and permit reforms. It looks like targeted rebates. It also looks like supporting customers and contractors to adapt to the Bay Area District's zero NOx appliance standards, which if they go forward, will be the biggest spur to electrification since REACH codes. But successful implementation of those rules and avoiding unintended consequences really requires support. That looks like the coordination work we're doing across CCAs to think about developing programs together so that we can have cost efficiencies across the market. And then finally, rebates aren't meant to last forever. And we're already seeing the signs that the heat pump HVAC market is maturing, that we'll be able to begin phasing those out towards the end of this cycle. So beginning to prepare for that. And the third priority is around EVs. And this is a shift. This is one of those ones I like being surprised. And a few years ago, this would not have been the recommendation, right? We were really focused on innovation in EVs. We really saw new market entrants coming into EV charging and a lot of opportunity to create nuanced, new types of solutions. Now with changes at the federal level and from manufacturers, there's a lot of uncertainty. And so we need to continue to lean in to provide support and build the market for reliable, affordable EV charging while managing risks, right? It's a time to do meat and potato investments, the things that don't have, that are going to be evergreen and durable no matter what happens, while also focusing on ensuring that the policy landscape supports affordable multifamily residents in the long term. And then, of course, as it says, monitoring things because things could change again. A big new EV entrant could shake things up, or changes in the EVI marketplace similarly. And finally, the fourth priority, scaling impact through knowledge sharing. This is also something that one of you talked about and recommended during the EC meeting and saying, hey, we really need to share the lessons that we have learned. Well, arguably, one of the biggest impacts that we can have is through our influence. And this is something that we do already, but I would call this a leveling up. It's formalizing, ensuring that our pilots have really actionable results and takeaways, partnering with academic institutions and committing to publishing 2 to 3 learnings a year and making sure that the findings of those learnings are used in our advocacy as well as to improve our own programs and planning approaches. Okay. By focusing on these 4 priorities, if we are successful, by 2033, we will have identified at least 3 priority locations for sensible local generation. We will have quantified 2 cost-effective pathways for incorporating demand flex into our clean portfolio. Heat pump HVAC will outsell AC with gas furnaces with no incentives, and heat pump water heaters will be 20% less than they are today. There'll be twice the number of EV charging stations available, and we will have published 10 learnings and shared them with stakeholders on a statewide level.
I'd just like to note for the minutes that Director Martinez Beltran has joined us. Thank you very much.
Noted, thank you.
Of course, besides having the right plan and a method to track the plan and success, What's critical to any plan's effectiveness is ensuring that it's implemented. And so I just want to share this piece, that all of this work has been co-created with staff from across the agency. And we're also developing the kind of next set of detailed recommendations that tie to how we operationalize and do work to ensure that this is clear, doable, and doesn't become something that is disconnected from our everyday work. And then also these outcomes will be part of our annual reporting to the board so that you have transparency on our progress. October is the next meeting. That concludes the meat of my presentation. I look forward to your questions and conversation. And this is a reminder of the action.
Okay, thank you very much. There was a great deal there, so I'm sure people do have comments and questions. And I'm looking around and I don't see. Okay, Director Mekachek.
Thank you very much. It's good to see this, and you gave us the high level, but there's a lot to unpack there. What I'd like to do is just make a couple comments on what I'm seeing today and where the opportunities are. If you could go to slide 20, please. What I see here, or what I don't see here, are price signals. And when you use more electricity, I think there's the opportunity at the residential level to move your demand around, but you need to have the right price signal. So for example, the cost of electricity is very low between midnight and 7 a.m. But that's high carbon electricity, right? So it's just price signals, I think, are important, and to the extent we can influence rates, that could help us in the future. So that's just a comment that I put down. And also on the demand side, being able to have technology that reduces your demand relative to what the price of electricity is. So that's one. Go to the next slide, please. I have a townhouse, and a few years ago, when the rebates first started for heat pump water heaters, I got a heat pump water heater in there. And it was one of the first ones in Los Gatos. And then just this week, 2 days ago, I got a text message from my neighbor saying, hey, we were putting in a heat pump water heater and having someone install it. And the inspector came out and said, you haven't included a vent for your pressure release valve. And he said that he was here a few years ago and someone else in the complex had one. Was it you?
No.
So my point is that contractors still need to be educated, right? So it's you think that they're all educated, but they're not. So that's, in point number 2, support contractors. So I just wanted to give you that. And then go to the next slide, please. What's not in here, and if you kind of go to the leading edge, it's bi-directional charging. And I know Director Otto Lee, he's got the ability to do bi-directional charging. And, it's just something that I just saw and thought I would comment on. And then my final comment, go to the next slide, please. Are we going to share our integrated decarbonization roadmap with other CCAs? So there's your first one on knowledge sharing. Okay, that's good. Those are my comments, and very well done. And I think this will provide a strong direction and the ability to measure our progress in the future.
Thank you, Chair Klein.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for the presentation. As Director Makachuk said, it is very dense. And so, but I appreciate the details. You know, for me, and going to page, and actually it's on page 24. Lost a page number. So the local generation, I would like to at least see that as expanded to generation or storage, because to me that generation is definitely one thing, but I think the value of storage and storing locally, and it is really generation off hours or stored energy, but I think clarifying that I think is important from a board standpoint. That might be your intention already. Or actually, let me ask that question specifically. When you say store generation, do you always mean potentially just storage and then from a staffing standpoint?
Yeah, for the most part, it'd be solar paired with storage or standalone storage.
Okay.
I don't know if there's opportunities for wind in our service territory, but that's
No.
what we're talking
But when
about.
you say generation,
Yeah, for sure, yeah. It should be clean resources.
okay. And I appreciate
Yeah.
that because I think that's a little bit easier to do in our area. Not both have value, you know, solar panels and storage. That being said, conceivably adding, you know, storage is a little bit easier and you know, if you talk about transmission, I think that has a lot of value.
Yeah, I think adding clean is important too, because we're not talking about Bloom Energy. We're not talking about fuel cells.
Actually, yeah,
Right.
thank you. So, and then, hang on, you talk about twice the number of EVs, EV charging stations here. There's kind of an ongoing, and we have this issue when we talk about homes or multifamily homes being added. Is it the goal of, when we're looking at these numbers, or we're looking at, this is how many multifamily sites there are now, or how many multifamily units, those will be increasing while we simultaneously, a lot of the new ones will immediately add EV chargers. Are we looking at more retroactive only here, or just total numbers? And it's like, we've added, you know, additional housing in most of the new housing, not all, adds EV chargers. Are we considering that as a win also? You know,
Yeah.
from a service area standpoint.
Great point. The intention in in the majority of our programs is to focus on the existing multifamily. And so that's the intention of this goal. I will say that EV reach codes for new construction was also a big part of our work. And so we want to find a way to capture that. But this outcome was written and based on what would be added to existing multifamily. Also, workplace charging and public charging does help multifamily residents, but it's meant not to include the new construction.
Okay, and that's,
But
so
we could think about how that would be
I would think about
quantified,
that
yeah.
as over the existing base or something of that nature. You know,
Okay.
definitely that, and what we hear from residents is, you know, they don't have EV chargers and they're having to park blocks away from their multifamily in order to charge their EVs. So I think just clarifying that, because at least what I'm seeing in new construction, because of the codes, and I appreciate the staff's efforts on pushing on those code and enhancements, we are seeing a lot more EVs, not just EV ready, but actual EVs, because they see that the residents are actually requiring them. And as a general item, and I don't know where to capture this. And you talked a little bit about pilot programs and that we're dealing with. And the executive committee, the board gets updates on different pilot programs that we have. From an executive committee standpoint, at least, and probably the general board, I think it would be useful to see the timing. You know, you're looking at a 5-year window, and staff is doing fantastic things on pilot programs here and there and all that. What I don't get a good vision of is start time what is the sunset of a program when, and kind of what the success is. And it's like, when does it start? When does it end? Or is it continuous from this period standpoint? How do we track that? And I understand you were talking about numbers here, but I think it's it's a bigger picture for the organization that we have certain pilot programs that we then evaluate that I would love to see get a better feel for, oh, this is a 1-year program. This is actually a 3-year program, and the goal and what those goals are. We get a depth at a certain level, but I think charting that and what those goals are and how that relates to that window is also really important.
Great feedback. Thank you.
And for time, I'll just I appreciate, I love the information that's here. I think what you're laying out is exactly kind of that breakdown that we need for staff, as well as this board and future boards as the board continues to change on what our goals are and what we're trying to do. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Director Meadows.
Go down the, thank you, Chair. Yes, chock full of good information. I won't say dense, but different terminology. So I support the goal, but I'm going to ask some questions around the realism or lack thereof it. So, so we're really talking, so this is going to the board in October, it sounds like. So that means, we're basically at 2027. That's 18 years. And if I read the plain and simple language, drive the SVCE region to fully electrify every building and vehicle by 2045 and power with clean energy. That would be great. But every building and vehicle means not just new, and we know that new is just a little tip of, as we see when we adopt enhanced building codes, I'm going to call them, rather than the terminology we use. I will stick with enhanced building codes. That the new is where you can really drive more quickly through codes. So there's still going to be, so looking at building and vehicles, vehicle turnover is more quickly. So I think, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, that the adoption of the EVs is an easier challenge because the turnover is more rapid than potentially existing buildings that the turnover is kind of based on the lifetime of their appliances and et cetera, et cetera. So, so you have new, which we know we can drive more effectively than we can drive existing. We have 18 years, because this is going to be 2027 before this is the goal, to do that, penetrating not just the new, but the existing. So to me, that's a lot. And then the wording says the SVCE region to fully electrify. So that sounds like more than our customers, but if you say region, and that includes, then that would include the IOUs and direct access and all that. Is that what, that, so what's in our control? Are we really trying to drive a customer base outside of our control or not? Again, I support if we can do all this. I'm just pointing out, I'm struggling to understand how even, within our customer base, it's a big goal. But within the region, which includes beyond our customer base, again, maybe leading by example will do that, but I still think we have less control, especially in 18 years. So if you look at particularly making inroads over 18 years in buildings to achieve 100%, and we actually don't, so I don't know if the absolute number is fully electrified means 100%, but again, how do we measure that? So I'm just struggling with the detail. I support the goal, but these are the questions around the definition of that I would would have.
Yeah, perfect. Let me try to tease out
Yeah.
some of that. And
Mhm.
so I love that you brought up this question, the SVCE region. We did a lot of wordsmithing on, should we say SVCE territory? Should we
Yeah.
say customers and communities? How do we kind of be clear on this? I will say we're 97, 96% of folks in our service territory. So we service territory for a public goal, just it felt too cold, I guess. But this is meant to be SVCE service territory. And yes, trying to influence that 4% that is that are not our customers over that time. But I would say even if we were to say SVCE customers, the substance of the recommendations wouldn't change that much. If we were to change this to something, so that's the question on the definition. The other one was the realisticness of the goal. And so that's a hard one to answer. So I'll just give you my thought process on this. The state has set carbon neutrality goal. Modeling has been done many, many times. To meet that goal, this is what is required. We could say 90% or 80%. If we were to kind of say, what do we think is actually going to happen? We could track things back that way. But I would also say substantively, some things would change, right? You would say, oh, we're going to not worry at all about really expensive things like commercial kitchens, honestly, if you were just trying to be really, really focused. But the state is moving in this direction, right? We're just starting now, but there's conversations about what does it look like to begin to decommission the gas system. And so I think that it behooves us to actually prepare in that direction, but to do it wisely, right? Not to do the really expensive, hardest and riskiest things now. Not to, I think this was a comment that came up, not to focus on really old buildings that may get torn down in the next 18 years and are very expensive and have a lot of other issues, but instead to say this is what it would require. And so let's focus on doing what makes the sense now, but also is building so that these costs will drive down over time. Is that enough of an answer? Okay.
Director Tyson?
Okay.
Well, we've already had a lot of good questions and
Mhm.
great answers too. And so I just want to echo the others in applauding this effort. I think it's great that you're extending, that you're lining up with the state. You're recognizing it's bumpy. We just saw that from your chart. You know, in 2020, boy, were we excited. Were we excited, Bruce Carney? But it didn't stay, did it? And so just without belaboring things, some things that struck me, I like what Director Mekachuk said about the time-based rates and the effect that it can shift behavior and then also create capacity. Let me tie that in with a thought I didn't really see in here about panel upgrades, because that's a barrier to cost. So to the extent people could use an existing panel, I think would help smooth some of that transition too. And it's related to time and rate and smart appliances. The second point, I think, was on slide 23 about the outreach and the communication. And I think you've touched on this already to say, let's make sure that we're sharing with other CCAs and the industry at large, that it's not just us learning and reporting back to our customers. And then the last thing that kind of bugged me from the start, and you've just answered it quite well, about the 100%. Like 100% is not happening, but we can kind of acknowledge that it's aspirational. It lines up with the state. But about what your answer, what I really liked the best was we're going to triage and we're going to focus on the things where we have the most oomph that we can make something happen. And that's the goal, trying to make things happen and not be too idealistic and push against an impossible barrier. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Thank you. Director Martinez Beltran.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask a little bit on, I think it was on page 4 and focusing on the buildings. And I'm wondering, I feel like we've gotten so much value from focusing on the public facilities and really wanting to understand how much emphasis we're putting on that versus the commercial side. I think, as leaders and cities being leaders, I think when we are investing in those public facilities that our residents are in all of the time, and that may not be at the, top of the chain to kind of switch over. It's just such a good standard to set, and I think it really creates great motivation for that to happen. And so I would love for us to really drill down and see a good emphasis on that. And I wanted to see if you could tell me, has there been, conversation about emphasizing on that?
Great question, and this is a hard one. So I'm going to say we invested well over $10 million. I can't pull the exact figure up right now in grant programs for public buildings and community buildings. They have tremendous value for education, for demonstration. They are also very expensive. These are, if I always say I get the joy of having gotten to facilitate our most cost-effective program, it's Reach Codes, and probably the one that was the most expensive, which is our resilience program, right? And so as we think about these trade-offs, we need to be aware of that, right? And so what the detailed recommendations that we have on working with our member agencies, we're thinking about how can we continue to really expand the communication and engagement efforts for the buildings that we have already funded, because they take a long time too to get up and running, right? Several years. So many of them are just coming online now. And so we want to make sure that we're maximizing that engagement value. How can we also make sure that our member agencies are leveraging our rebate programs, which they're eligible for, to upgrade their water heating and HVAC at the right time? And then are there other ways that we could maybe integrate with capital improvement planning processes and support our member agencies? And then as budgets are available, continue to do grant programs, but probably not at the same level that we have been in the past.
Maybe I'll add to that. One of the efforts that we're working with your staffs, not with every city, just as really kind of on a case-by-case basis as we see the need, is to see if there's opportunities for us to partner with the cities on developing clean local resources. So if your facility has a critical need for solar storage, in the past, you would go through the market, you would have an independent provider, you would get an M credit, blah, blah, blah. A lot of those incentives have gone away. And so now it's an opportunity for us to maybe step in and say, hey, if we partner with you and we sign some kind of an agreement, we get the local clean energy credits, we get the reliability value, you get the resiliency, and you also get some reduction in your cost as well. So we're doing that, that's part of when she talks about local resources or local generation, that's what that's about as well. So there'll still be opportunities for us to partner with the cities.
Okay, that's fantastic. There was a comment there I wanted, but I've missed it. So I'll move on to page 5 that talked about, some of the most powerful levels of, I was just going to note that Director Showalter was talking, I think it was Director Meadows, how we say the reach codes. And I think that is an opportunity for us to rebrand, right? Enhancements. Everybody wants to have the newest, latest, greatest thing. And I think enhancement codes certainly does do that. So I will second that. And then, I forgot where I was going with this, but when we look at, I'm going to skip over to the parking, and we've been having some talking about parking and downtown and all of that. And I wondered if we could also maybe partner up with, maybe it's private, but also, with public facilities, and just thinking about where we're placing these EV chargers. We all struggle with parking issues. If you want to get your car charged while you're out to dinner, while you're doing whatever you're doing, thinking about strategically where we're placing those to encourage less congestion of parking, or where we want people to actually be parking. So that was just something that kind of popped up for me. How are we determining the goal Are we working with Cal CCA? Are we looking at the overall goal that you talk about? How are we figuring out this is the right goal for us? Is it Cal CCA is also doing that type of, calculation, looking at population, looking at geographic, as well as targets that we've already met? So I'm just wondering if that is also going in there.
No, this is it's not in coordination with Cal CCA.
Okay.
Because every CCA too has a unique mission
Mm-hmm.
and unique service territory. SVCE's mission has been clearly focused on reducing dependence on fossil fuels through energy and programs, right? And then over time in the last decarb roadmap, right, we really focused on this trajectory. This is now an updated goal to say to meet that mission and to align with a new state regulation. This is what we think is necessary, right? And within our sphere, again, and very importantly, within our sphere of influence. In that emissions pie, there's a lot of things that we do not directly or even indirectly influence. An example is how long people hold on to their car vehicle, to their car. Models were updated last year showing that people keep their cars longer. That had bigger influence than almost anything else that SVCE could do. So again, it's focusing on the things that we don't control, but that we influence.
I understand that. I
Okay.
appreciate that as
Yeah.
well. I guess I'm just wondering, since there's so much information from our other colleagues, if you will, right, in the business, and some of them probably have similar markets to us. I mean, one may have a refinery, so things are going to be different. But, are we also taking our goals that we've established for ourselves and kind of comparing that to what they also are doing?
Can I ask, are you referring to the overarching goal or the targets that we've laid out on that table in terms of how many appliances we want to replace, how many cars we want to replace?
The overarching
The
goal.
overarching goal. Okay, I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, I guess this, let me know if this doesn't answer the question. So to achieve that carbon neutrality, which is now the codified state goal, achieving that requires removing fossil fuel combustion vehicles from the roads and removing gas from heating, water, and conditioning buildings. That's just the bottom line. There's no way that the state meets that goal without doing those things. And so what we're saying, since SVCE works in electrification, let's focus our efforts on that building, transportation, and clean energy vehicles. I kind of was getting into that. We could get very nuanced on saying, should we say 80% or 90%? But that almost asks a level of specificity and question without adding quite as much direct value, I think, to staff and the board. So that's why we're saying that we should simply be aligned with the state goals and say that we will drive. Again, we will not electrify every one of those ourselves, but we do see ourselves as the leader in the region, the leading convener to achieve that goal.
Okay, so more
Hope
about
that's-
the trend setting. Okay. And then I did just want to ask a little bit more on cars and pre-owned cars. And what is the thought on how we go on addressing that, as you've just said, right? We have no idea how long people are going to hang on to their cars. And there is a very robust secondary market for used vehicles. So what is kind of the talk or, the standard for how people are looking at that change?
We do provide rebates for used EVs. And that was a relatively new component of our EV work. But I would say the deeper focus of our work has been on EV charging, because we think that's the investment that we can make that can really catalyze further adoption, make it more attractive to people and more feasible for people to buy an EV, right?
Okay, so to that, I guess I will say that, at least in my experience growing up, there are people who work on car, who know how to fix and repair and, right, and there's a comfort level with that, unlike with an EV. And I think getting, everybody across that threshold, is there any type of, we talk a lot about how our vendors, we want to make sure that we get them up to par and they're certified, and we've got new contractors who are coming in learning the trade. But is there anything to, I guess, maybe it's the savings of the maintenance or whatever the education and to get people to kind of let go of that, like the gas stove type thing, right?
Yeah, I will say there probably is, and we do a lot of through our eHub and through our community engagement work, talk a lot about the benefits of EV ownership itself, including reduced maintenance and reduced fueling costs. You don't see it listed as one of our key priorities because what we really do want to hone in with this program to say or with this roadmap, what are 4 priorities?
Right.
And that in that area, what we're really honing in on are the EV charging investments as top level prioritization.
Okay. There was one more. I'm trying to remember exactly what my question was around it. I think it was more about, it was page 4 and looking at the budget that we have and our kind of our current forecast. And I saw that there was the, medium budget, higher budget. There was only one of the lower budget, so I feel that that is signaling we're pretty comfortable that we're going to end up in that current forecast range of what we're going to be spending again.
This is the orange is our current budget trajectory and is what is planned for. What this is meant to say is things change. Right. And one of the things we developed this during the conversation on the financial levers playbook. Right. And we wanted to say Justin and I have been working in concert on these things. And we were thinking through, well, if something in the near term shifted that budget down, or you all may remember, I guess a year and a half ago,
yes,
we were projecting a very high budget. Right. And you all adopted the Clean Community Energy Fund or Clean Energy Fund. And the recommendations here also align with the waterfall priorities that were adopted at that time, right? So it allows us to incorporate and optimize and change based on changing conditions.
And I think that that's great, is my whole point. This is just signaling to me, we've learned and we're now incorporating those learnings into it. So thank you. It was a great report.
Hey, I understand that Director Makachek has a follow-up.
Oh, I was going to say that in terms of the goal, being aligned with the state is very important. For us not to be aligned with the state is inappropriate. The other thing is being aligned with the state helps our voice in Sacramento. So if we're advocating for something through Cal CCA or whatever to say, hey, we're completely aligned, for us to meet our goal, which is your goal, we need to have this, whatever. So I commend you for putting that stretch goal in because it may not be achievable, but that's what the state's goal is. Now I'm repeating myself, so.
That's a very good point. Thank you for making that. Okay, I'm going to wrap up quickly because we're kind of right on schedule, maybe a little over, but all very close. And I just wanted to say, I do think that this is great. I particularly like the idea that we are getting a little more pragmatic and with things that are, it's very easy to measure. You either have a electric heat pump or you don't, right? I like that. I wanted to talk a little bit about what happens after this period. We're going to concentrate now on all the things you've listed, and primarily they are residential changes. But we know that to meet those long-term goals, we need to later make sure that the commercial sector morphs as well.
Yep.
and updates as well. So I just want to mention that we want to, maybe not at the high level that we do the residential, we want to continue and think about how we can interact with the commercial sector. And certainly a couple things come to mind. The Chamber of Commerce's, the leadership group. We're having the meeting with Silicon Valley. What's it? Silicon Valley? Aren't they helping with the meeting on Monday? I'm
Cities Association.
the Cities Association, but who does the Silicon Valley Index? Those people, I thought.
Oh, joint venture.
Joint venture, yeah. Okay, that's another one that we work with. And I think that those efforts are also important. So I just want to mention that. And then the other thing I wanted to say is my favorite thing is slide 25, which says the most important part of the plan comes after its adoption. Thank you so much for that.
Good.
Okay, so with that, I will ask for a motion. No, first we have the comment and then we'll have the motion. So we have one person in the room, I'm sure wants to speak, and we might have somebody online. So welcome, Mr. Carney.
Over the microphone? Yes, I guess I do. Thank you so much. I don't think I've cried in the last 20 years, but this almost brings me to tears because, yeah, you got it. So there will be a 2045. I'll be 93 in 2045. I hope I'm here to see the achievement of this goal. I hope long before I'm 95, I see every city represented here and the other cities represented by the non-executive committee members adopting exactly the same goal that SVCE is setting out. And as we navigate to 2045, I would love for SVCE to publish their thoughts around 4 or 5 things that will be different in 2045 than they are today. So the first thing is, what will the temperature be like in the summer in Santa Clara County? My projection, based on about 15 years of data, is that there'll be more cooling degree days than heating degree days by 2052. And so the desire to have air conditioning will be a huge driver of the adoption of heat pumps, and may in fact force landlords to put in heat pumps in old apartment buildings in order to keep their residents cool in the summer. What's going to happen to the price of natural gas over the next 2 decades? I've seen charts from the CPUC that forecast an extraordinary increase in the price of natural gas as the number of people using gas goes down and the fixed costs of the city have to be spread across a smaller number of therms. What's going to happen to the speed of EV charging of new EVs? There are Chinese EVs that can charge at 1,000 kilowatts. My 8-year-old Bolt can charge at 50 kilowatts. And so if I could charge at 1,000 kilowatts, I wouldn't want a charger in my home. I just go to an electron station and charge up in 15 minutes or maybe even less. So the approach of that technology seems very imminent, which may imply that the investing in existing buildings, charging infrastructure may not pay off over the long haul. What about autonomous vehicles? Perhaps not in South County, but certainly in Mountain View. I see Waymos and autonomous vehicles all the time. When I'm 93 years old, I probably won't be driving. But when I'm 73, no, I'm already 73. I'm still driving. When I'm 78, will I still want to own a car and pay the insurance and all that stuff? So the autonomous vehicles, which will presumably always know where to charge themselves, could be a huge part of the conversion solution. And the last thing I'd like to say is that Carbon-Free Mountain View for several years has had a slightly different spin on what our goal is for 2045. We have said, hey, Mountain View, we should ban the flow of piped natural gas. And that was our way to electrify buildings. We're saying you can't have any more gas. Propane is part of the solution if you believe.
Just go ahead and wind up, but keep going.
Okay.
You can wind up.
Propane is part of the solution if you believe that it's the piping and the leaking of natural gas that are the core of the problem. So it'd be interesting to know what Silicon Valley Clean Energy thinks about propane for those last 2% of the households that won't give up their gas, or those in the mountains who don't have reliable electricity. Its global warming potential is about 10% of the global warming potential of natural gas leakage. But of course, its CO2 emissions are pretty much the same per therm. So thanks for the chance to go a little long, but this is a day that I have been waiting for 14 years now.
Well, we're all glad to hear that. That is great, Bruce. Okay. So I would
I'll
like,
make a motion
Okay.
to recommend that the Board of Directors.
oh, wait,
approves-
is there any, just a second, is there someone remote on public comment?
We have no public comment remotely.
Okay, all right. So I will close public comment then. And thank you very much for your motion,
Sure.
Director Beltran. And do I have a second?
I'll second.
Matchek, okay. So we have a motion and we have a second, and I think it's time to vote. So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? The motion passes unanimously, and we will all look forward to this discussion in October. Thank you so much to staff for all your hard work on this. It's clear that a tremendous amount of thinking has gone into that and this, and we really appreciate it. Okay, so we move on to item 4. That is recommend the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Board of Directors approve amendments to their energy risk management policy. So this is an action, and we're going to be led by Scott Rigglesworth, who is joining us electronically. And
Maybe I can just start before he starts. Just for context, we review our energy risk management policy on a regular basis, and when we find things that seem a little bit out of line or we need to make changes to reflect practice, we bring those changes through a series of just committees. And so we've reviewed this with the group that advises me, the Risk Oversight Committee. We've reviewed them with the Finance Committee last week, and so they'll come into you and then they'll go to the board. And so these are pretty straightforward. And in the essence of time, Scott already knows he's going to zip through this as fast as he can, and hopefully we can get it done in maybe 5 minutes. So that's the plan.
All right, we can just advance to the next slide. And Monica already addressed this, but the policy actually already contains reference to periodic review. So what we're coming to you with is not out of scope or norm for the policy. I will add, so I don't forget, the Finance Committee encouraged us to attach to the staff report for this presentation a separate risk controls and oversight presentation that we gave them. So at your leisure, you could review that, which might give you some general idea of how this fits into what we already do across the board for controls. So I did want to mention that before I forget. Next slide. So there's changes through the red line that you can see in the policy attachment for the red line. I would argue only 2 are really substantive, so I'm going to speak to those 2, and then I'll give you the others in summary, and if there's any questions, we can answer them. So the first one that is what I'll call a substantive is to modify the language in the policy that implied that derivatives, so what derivatives are a type of transaction, that implied that derivatives as a tool were inherently speculative. So policy says don't use derivatives. Policy says don't be speculative. There's a certain sentence that's there that says, that implies derivatives are speculative, but we don't necessarily believe that. So we want to clean that up to where we're just separating those 2 things, and we're just saying policies don't speculate, policies don't use derivatives at this time, and leave it at that. So the other change here in the purple on the red line is just that procurement needs to contemplate the regulatory constraints that we have so that we're in compliance. So we might not speculate, but we might need to buy in excess of load if their regulator tells us so we have to. So That's the context on this point. I'll go to the second, and then I can maybe stop for see if there's any questions. The second is, some of you may recall that last year we approved change to the ERM policy that allowed us to account for the PCIA as a hedge to us, meaning when market prices change, the PCIA is going to change, and that's going to have an impact on our bottom line. And as such, we should account for that in the way that all the math works as it trickles through. One shortcoming of that change was we did not, at that time, contemplate the implications on what you see in this table as years 2, 3, 4, and 5 into the future for hedge thresholds. Hedge thresholds have been used by the industry for a long time to create kind of dollar cost averaging, over time programmatic procurement schedules. In our case, the PCIA hedge, which is a regulatory thing that's put to us, as well as procurement plans issued by the CPUC that are put to us as long-term procurement we have to make. Those two things combine to kind of get us to 80 to 90% on our thresholds. So the outer years that we're at 80% immediately say we're in violation, but really we're saying we're in violation because we're acknowledging two regulatory realities as we manage the risk of the portfolio. So the change here is to acknowledge that, hey, this traditional schedule of laddered hedge levels is not working for us in the sense of the state and the environment that we're in. And so we just need to acknowledge on the high side that the numbers will add up. And this is the case too, because we're actually seeing the PPAs come online now. And so they're delivering energy, it's fixed priced energy, and therefore it is a hedge for us on the energy side. And again, here we've just acknowledged that the exception would be if necessary, Monica can make clear to committees in the board that there might be a need to be in excess if there's a compliance matter that is in place. So let me pause there and just see if you have any questions. If none, I'll jump to one more slide.
Does anyone have any questions? Okay, I don't think so, Scott. Keep going.
All right, so the next slide is what I'll just say is non-substantive changes. I'm just going to tell you what they are. I'm not going to get into the details. So if we go to the next slide, what I don't want to do is rush through it and then have you feel like I didn't give you the full picture. So the first change was to acknowledge solicitations. So you'll see all these as red lines in the red line copy of the policy, to add a word of solicitations in the intro to acknowledge that we will follow a solicitation process when procuring routinely. The second was to add an explanation of load risk, which was expanded to acknowledge the binary nature of large loads that could come or go to our portfolio. That kind of goes beyond the traditional weather related load risk in terms of how much customers consume because of temperatures and such. The third was to clean up the product list. If you review that in the red lines, you'll see that there was really just a making of bullet points that I think over time were added, be more concise to remove some things that were probably duplicative and depending on how you use semantics on certain words. CRRs were added as an explanation. So CRRs are congestion revenue rights. So we found that it would be prudent to put in a description of what those instruments are. And then we clarified auction versus allocation as two different methods by which we acquire CRRs. Allocation comes to us free because we're a load serving entity in California. And those we're saying are just something that we get, but that the delegated authority to the CEO is specifically for any CRRs that we would acquire through auction. And then one item is particularly me making my job easier. There was a footnote on a table that in this past year, probably 3 times I got a question from staff to clarify it. And so I just would like to edit it to make the clarification permanent. And then the last item is just that Mike recommended we change the language from direct holdings to financial interest in our conflict of interest language. That would then align with proper legal terminology. So that's what I'll call the non-substantive changes. They're all there for you in the red line version. And this presentation in an appendix has a walkthrough of each one illustratively as well.
Thank you. Do we have any board questions? Director Makachek?
I don't have a question, but I want to make a comment, so I can make that comment after the questions, or?
Let's go ahead now.
Okay. On 8 days ago, we had this same presentation, we, the Finance and Administration Committee, and we spent a lot of time drilling in to all of the words and all of the changes in an immense amount of detail. And we, the Finance Committee, thought it's really good. So this has our vetting, our questioning, our due diligence, and our endorsement. So Scott, that was really well done last week.
Thank you, Victor. I will also say, just for clarity, that the ask of you as an action is for you to recommend that the board approve this on consent, not that you are recommending it to put it in place.
Does anyone else have a comment? Okay, I would just like to thank Monica for talking to me about this yesterday. And I wanted to just daylight one question, and that is on the list of approved transactions. It might be included somewhere, but I'm having a little trouble finding it. And that is storage capacity is crossed off, and it doesn't seem to be listed in the ones that are there. And I'm wondering, is it included in something, or why wouldn't storage capacity be something we could do?
Andrea, could you do me the favor of pulling up the appendix?
It's 12. It's slide 12. Oh, the paper, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, go back to that. There we go. You get a gold star.
I'll have to bank that. Yeah.
Before it goes to the board, we can adjust that. It would be included in energy technically, but I think that it would be prudent for us to acknowledge that storage is an acceptable technology. So. Okay,
thank you. All right, so we need to go. Any more questions or from the committee? I don't see. So we need to go to public comment. Is there anyone in the room who would like to comment on this? I don't see anyone. Do you see anyone online, Andrea?
None online, Chair.
Okay. All right. So I'll bring this back to the board for a motion.
I will go ahead and move that the Board of Directors approve that we move item number 4. That we recommend that we bring this to the Board of Directors to approve the update to the policy.
Second by Meadows.
All right, so we have a motion by Tyson and a second by Meadows. And so it's time for us to vote. And I think we can just do a voice vote. So all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? All right, the motion passes unanimously, and thank you very much for your work on this. And also, it's good to hear that it has been shared through so many levels of our committee structure, because that means a lot of directors have had a chance to kind of hear about this a couple of times. And the things that we deal with on this board are quite technical. So I, for one, find hearing them a couple of times really helpful. Okay, so with that, it looks like we are getting set up for our last item of the day, which is item 5. and that is Silicon Valley Clean Energy Update on Demand Flexibility, Lunar, our contract with Lunar, and the next steps. And we will be, our staff, Alicia Pagan and Joseph Land, will be talking to us. Thank you.
All right, good morning, directors. Just for a quick overview of the agenda, we're going to start with the key takeaways just to help steer the conversation. It's a somewhat unruly topic at times, and we want to recap what we've been trying to do in demand flexibility broadly and specifically together with Lunar Energy. I'll pass it over to Alicia for a review of some really interesting work looking at the costs and benefits of demand flexibility in different types of programs. And we'll hopefully have some time for discussion and a handful of recommendations. So for the key takeaways, we started with a pretty ambitious goal in demand flexibility. This was centered around a contract with Lunar Energy for various programmatic services and a distributed energy resources management system, or DERMS. Over the past year, we've analyzed dozens of different load management scenarios, looking at different device types, different program models, different valuation frameworks to really understand what this can do for us. And the finding has been that demand flexibility programs are generally more expensive than standard power supply alternatives. We think these are really important findings, and they're somewhat unique and already stimulating some interesting conversations. So we want to be able to take this to other CCAs, to program partners, work with regulators potentially, just to make clear what some of the barriers are that we're finding and ensure that we're clear-eyed moving ahead. So I'll leave these key terms up here for a moment. These are terms and acronyms we might jump into. We're a little tight on time, so I'm not going to go through the list. But VPP and DERMS may be familiar. If anything looks off or you have questions, just let me know and jump in. And as all of you know, demand flexibility is not a new topic for SVCE. SVCE has been a leading CCA in piloting new solutions for quite some time. Starting in 2019, SVCE published the VPP options analysis, which outlined 3 pathways for implementing a virtual power plant type program that included dynamic pricing, demand response, and load shifting programs. In 2020, we contracted with Sunrun for 1 megawatt of behind-the-meter load modifying capacity. In 2021, we launched a managed EV charging app to more effectively manage EV charging loads. And in 2024, we kicked off our efforts with PG&E in implementing the dynamic rate pilot, otherwise known as the hourly flex pricing pilot. And in June of 2025, we worked on this contract together with Lunar in a framework for doing a much broader initiative in demand flexibility, not one specific pilot program, but a way to acquire quite a bit of demand flex capacity. And we also had a small scale pilot running with Renew Home last summer, looking at the value of micro load shifting with smart thermostats. All that is to say, we did a lot of what was in that initial VPP options analysis, and so now we have some useful data to look back at. You may recall this demand flexibility North Star. Our goal was really to enable all customers with the ability to earn savings by flexing their electricity use with 2 key components. One, understanding that this would contribute to a more reliable and clean grid, but also that it would generate some tangible value for SVCE. And the idea with the Lunar contract was that, again, this wouldn't be just another demand flex pilot. We wanted to land on a scalable solution that would allow us to engage new devices and do more with new programs. So we and many other CCAs have often thought of a DERMS as really being central to this effort. The DERMS connects to end-use loads. It can intake price signals from SVCE or other dispatch signals, and it provides really the infrastructure for running a virtual power plant. It underpins transactions that allow us to settle with customers and understand the value that SVCE accrues. And so that's why Lunar was a great partner to pick, local company with a leading DERMS platform, and a specialist in some other programmatic services. So the initial vision for the contract was a 5-year MSA, and it had some key elements in it. The first was the DERMS software itself, but also program design services and a somewhat flexible contract structure that would allow us to both start new programs, but also integrate flexible end-use loads from other SVCE electrification programs. And one thing that was great was that we included this component around value modeling. That was important because we didn't want to just allocate X dollars to a program without knowing what the results might be. So this value modeling component was the first important step. And bringing it back to the North Star, we had to answer the question, well, what is operational value for SVCE? And we iterated on a few different ideas of what this could be over time, but we landed on a very simple one, which is that the power supply benefits should be greater than the costs of funding these programs. And in the cost bucket, we have software costs for the DERMS. Across any program type, we have administrative costs. There are customer incentives that ensure that customers are engaged, can install eligible technologies, are willing to connect their devices to the DERMS platform. And then on the savings side, these are broadly power supply savings, avoided energy costs, avoided capacity costs, and avoided REX costs. So our first step in implementation together with Lunar was to look at the value of specific programs to determine what a reasonable budget proposal would be, and if that budget is viable for really running a program with the technology focus that we had. And so the first program we looked at was with batteries, but we've looked at others as well. And this involved creating a modeled load impact that looked at load profiles of specific customers on different versions of net metering, and as well as their own rate and their export compensation to understand what they're doing with batteries as a baseline. And at the same time, staff internally developed a really unique tool that allows us to assess what these programs could be worth by looking at a pre-engagement load profile and a post-engagement load profile. And paired with the results of the load impact modeling, it helps us to unpack what a given program or given project might be worth to SVCE. And with that, I think I'm going to pass it over to Alicia.
Great. So yeah, to Joey's point, we did these validation exercises to really figure out what we could kind of substantiate a program for and pass those incentives on to customers. And we've done several years of pilots. And so we have data to look at previous programs and pilots. And now because of this financial valuation tool, we can also look at future programs and what it would be worth to us. So we did that. And we looked at the first two are programs that we have done. So the managed EV charging, that's a 5-year pilot that concluded the end of last year. There was a smart thermostat pilot that we did last year with Renew Home. And then with this financial evaluation tool, we can now look at future programs. So RESI battery systems and CNI demand response. And overall, we found that they are more expensive than kind of power supply options. They're maybe 10 times approximately more, which is, yeah, it definitely gives us pause and be like, okay, let's take a step back and figure out what's going on here. So the next slide, I'm gonna kind of break this down for one of the examples. So for a RESI solar and battery system, we really had two questions for SVCE. The first one is, what happens to SVCE's margins when we have a customer who has no distributed energy resources move to something with solar and storage? And then what happens when we flex that load? We flex that battery to when it is optimal for the grid and SVCE as well. And so we modeled this for 2026, and then we also modeled this out 7 years. And for our margins, we define this as looking at SVC's revenues that we get through our rates, add in any benefits on the power supply side, subtract any export credits that we have to pay customers, and then subtract any power supply costs for actually serving that customer throughout the whole year. And yeah, what we found was pretty surprising. So if you look at the first line, we have 2026, and we looked at just kind of a base case, a regular customer on ETUC rate, and we added solar and storage. And what happens in 2026 is that it loses us money. It loses SVC's money for 2026. And this really has to do with how export compensation works under NEM, net billing tariff. And then when we add in battery flexing to that, so an incremental change to the solar storage system, and we say, let's flex this battery 50 times a year for the highest time prices of the year, we also lose money there, which is surprising. Like, this is a bit counterintuitive to the, we understand the theoretical value of this. So this gave us a pause, and we said, okay, what happens across 7 years though? Does that change? And across 7 years, kind of a similar thing happens to the flexing side, but there's a different story for the solar and storage, where across 7 years, there is value out several years because of the way of export compensation changes and renewable energy credit changes. So compared to a base case, there is value to SVCE for solar and storage. But when we flex that load again, we're losing margins. All right, next one. Again, we wanted to figure this out more because it was a bit all confusing. So then we looked at, what if we're not flexing this battery enough? What if we flexed it 200 times a year, half the year basically, and did what we could to bring in more value to SVCE? And the story is still the same, where we found that with battery and solar and storage, there is value across 7 years, but flexing it still doesn't provide value. And we also looked at the value to the customer. We also separately to this, just for our own understanding, and we also found that it loses customer money as well. It increases their bills. And so then the last line is then looking at a model where the battery is on a self-consumption mode. So rather than exporting to the grid, what if the battery is just optimizing to the home load and providing energy that way? And in that situation, we do see that that increases SVC's margin. So all around, it just seems like the flexing right now doesn't quite make sense based off of current market conditions, and that can change. Rules are changing. But when we basically look at this for a program right now, this is kind of how it look like in terms of our benefits and the costs. So these are two charts that we have with resi, solar, and storage, and then a CNI demand response program. They have slightly different structures, but the one on the left is representing this resi, solar, and storage program. So if we take this average customer and zoomed it up to a 30 megawatt program, our benefits is actually a loss. So we'd lose money for those customers. And then when we add in the software costs for the DERMS platform, add in program implementation, customer incentives, that leads to potentially up to $6 million loss for one average year. And then if we then look at a separate one, a CNI demand response, there is a slightly different revenue stream there, and our benefits can be quantified somewhat differently. So there is up to 600,000 in benefits, but then when we lay on costs, there's a similar story where it can lose us 3 million. It costs the 3 million to run. So yeah, overall, it's a bit of a head scratcher for us. And you might be asking what our other CCAs are doing. We've asked the same thing because we know other CCAs have their own VPP programs and battery storage programs. So we went to them like, what's going on for you? And it actually seems like we're one of the few that have done this type of analysis. There's a few other ones that are either undergoing this or have completed it. And so it's pretty new. Like what we're doing here and try to quantify in this way is really interesting. It's spurring a lot of interesting conversations. We also learned that other CCAs leverage a lot of external funding, and that is how they're able to stand up a program for several years. And then we also asked what are IOUs doing, because they also have VPP programs, battery programs. And looking into it, we learned that IOUs leverage, they have, of course, a different revenue model, but they also leverage public purpose funding for demand flexibility. They don't have to kind of look in this power supply benefit program costs in the same way. And so it also comes down to this thing called the state's avoided cost calculator, which is really complex, but they're just basically rules and market signals that are just really complex here in figuring out what is the value. And so what we're recommending, and not like a formal decision, is just more to update you all, is that we do want to pause on program development right now, because we think these are really interesting findings and we want to talk to other people about it. We want to kind of gut check this. We want to keep improving our financial analysis, but really get this out there, because we think this could really change statewide conversation and collaboration with other CCAs. But that means probably pausing program development now to revisit our initial 30 megawatt goals, keep monitoring market conditions and rules. Things are changing on a monthly basis, explore other funding opportunities that could get a program going. And we do have to figure out what this means for kind of other compliance rules, the load management standards, as well as thinking about our rates, because they play a role in this as well. So that is the presentation, and I'll pause there for questions. Yeah.
Director Martinez Beltran.
I wanted to know what are how long did you look at that information? I think it's really interesting, but how long were you looking at the information to come up with that?
How long in terms of how long we spent on this, or
No, how long?
in duration?
Right.
Yeah, so we looked at 1 year, so 2026, and we also we looked at up to 2033 too.
Okay, thank you.
Director Klein.
Thank you. And thanks for the presentation. Yeah, it's counterintuitive. Would we see, and we see just from a modeling standpoint, it's a little bit different between residential and C&I. Would, and all this is, there's always the question of how well your models match the real world. For larger loads and, let's say to a certain degree, a different kind of operational capability from a C&I standpoint, would conceivably that be different? And I understand you tried to put as much into that model as possible. And I'm just trying to think of the way loads are for C&I. Would that conceivably change the cost value? And I know you have the real data, and it's great to actually take a step back and evaluate real data for residential, which I applaud. It's like just not keep plowing ahead and like at the end say our impact wasn't as high as we were hoping, and then look back and say, oh, we should have stopped and figured out that. So I'd be interested to just get a quick feedback.
Yeah, so we have not quite done the full financial analysis actually of a C&I customer. So we primarily modeled this for a residential solar and storage, but I think this is kind of the next phase of the questions. I do think directionally it'll be the same and maybe even worse because of demand charges and how demand charges affects SVC's revenue. But again, yeah, kind of probably do need to just run it through the model and see what else is going on and what other insights it surfaces.
Okay. If I could add one component to that, the way that C&I demand response is valued and the way the demand side battery portfolio be valued is different because the C&I demand response would be a supply side product. And so its value is tracks much more closely with the value of capacity on the supply side at any point in time. And so just yesterday, we were talking with the power supply team about this and got some new information. So things can change quickly, and we'll be tracking that carefully.
Okay, thank you.
Director Meadows?
Thank you. Very interesting. So I'm wondering if, I mean, because again, intuitively, we all expect that, well, actually, let me confirm my understanding. So flex is the control of the load or automated control of the load. And so as you increased the number of control events, it improved, generally speaking, relative to fewer control events. Is that correct? I think that's what you were saying in the graphs.
So I think the other way around is that doing more control load shifting actually led to losses for SVCE. It would, reduce our margins.
Okay, I thought that you ran 20 and then you ran 200 or whatever the numbers were, and that it was less negative in the greater shift scenarios, but maybe not. You obviously would know, but let's look at that for a moment, because my statement then follows around this definition and I may have it backwards. So, all right.
Yeah, so in this chart, so we have the first box is a standard customer on a ETUC rate. Then we add solar and storage with no kind of controlling through the DERMS.
Yeah.
And then the last one would be us
Right.
initiating dispatches through
Right.
the DERMS.
So when you compare 50 flex events per year to the 200, was it 200 flex? So can you, okay, so minus 119, and then I should look at this. What's the previous? Minus 20. Oh, so it did get worse on the more. Okay, so that's odd too.
Yeah.
So regardless of my misunderstanding of that directionality, it still seems that, are we actually missing trying to quantify a value? So is there, like, we just had a very broad ranging discussion of our goals. And so is there some tie-in that brings value that we're not capturing? Again, I'm not saying we should ignore ROI or NPV or any of that stuff, because obviously we have to be able to manage, but are we missing capturing a value?
Yeah, that's the exact question I had as well when staff presented this
Uh-huh.
to me, and I'm like, that's not intuitive. I think, the big fundamental, the aha moment I had is the one that's in the middle box on the top. The price that we have to pay for the export energy is higher than what value we get from avoiding procurement costs. So that's a fundamental. And that procurement, the top line, the export price, that's a number that is calculated external to us. What we assume the value to be going forward, the wholesale price, the value of resource adequacy, the value of the energy, that is very variable too.
Right.
And so we only looked at this at one price point, and of course we could do a stochastic analysis and maybe the same thing would result. But then beyond that, I said, well, what other value could we see? There's a value of greenhouse gas reduction, perhaps, like maybe if we move from a high, a dirty hour to a clean hour, then we save some emissions. We don't have, and Bruce is going to probably follow up with me on this one, but the board hasn't calculated an externality value for greenhouse gas reduction. Like we don't have a dollar value that we could ascribe that to. But there are numbers out there, and that's another thing that we can consider. If that's a value to us, then that could be another way. But we're not trying to make these things look good. We're just telling you, this is where it is now. We need to figure out, do some more analysis and before we jump the gun and go and pursue these resources.
I appreciate, it's just a very interesting and complex, topic. So appreciate it.
Well, I'm glad
Director
you.
Tyson? Yeah.
Oh, yes. I'm glad you added that last part, although as others have said, it's counterintuitive. And I figure if you've got a resource, let's say it's a battery, it's capital that's sitting there. The less you use it, the worse you should be. A valuable asset should work. That's how you make money. But switching the story a little bit, we do have financial goals, but I was thinking of our conscience sitting over there, and I was thinking, what's our greenhouse gas? And so you brought it up there just right then, and so I was thinking, is there some times where they're not in lockstep, and I can't tell. I can't, but it's possible they're not in lockstep, and so it is I think a thing we can include in this in the future.
Yeah, and to this chart side 10, that's kind of where we delineate the scope of this analysis, where we did look at generation benefits to SVC. But yeah, there are customer benefits and a ton of bill savings if a customer adds solar and storage on their systems, as well as emission reduction. So agreed that there are different motivations here potentially.
You know, we pay a lot for reliability. I think about this. We have designed a system that is very reliable because that's part of our culture and our expectation. And so that's just another feature of a customer sitting there and the wind is blowing and the storm is saying, and they say, well, if the power goes out, I don't have to worry. And that's worth something to them, but it doesn't turn into this same economic calculation.
And I'm just gonna, sorry, can I just chime in from my remote location? Just to say, I think we're all sort of speaking to this thing that we also felt when we were looking at this analysis, which is conceptually demand flex makes a lot of sense for all of these reasons we're talking about, and there are these values. And what we're really trying to make sure that we can do is have that economic value also show up both for SVCE and for the customer, because we're trying to make this be an offer that works for both of us, because that is how we feel like we're going to get to this sort of virtuous cycle of reinforcement of expanding this at scale. And if we can't get those things aligned, then we will not be able to make it scale. And that's really our sort of goal here. And so what Joey and Alicia in this analysis have sort of uncovered is an issue, I'll say, with the realizable savings around demand flex, which has to do with how RA works. It has to do with procurement orders. It has to do with a variety of things. And so there's some things that we can tweak. There's some things that we're probably going to go, talk to state about and say, hey, when you assume a certain amount of value for the export credit for these things, you're saying X and Y, but we as a load serving entity, we're not seeing that based on the way that this pans out. And so how do we square that so that we can really make this like work for all parties, which then would allow us to scale this up. So just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Okay, and I'm gonna, I think this is, the right answer now. So I really appreciate you bringing it to us. And I think, again, we talk about governance. This is good governance. You have worked on a problem and you've come to a point where continuing to spend the money the way you were spending it doesn't make sense. So you're telling us that, and we really appreciate that. And I know that it takes kind of a lot of professional gumption to do that, or courage. So I appreciate you doing that. Oh, Yvonne, you have another question? I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Okay, well, then I was going to say, but that doesn't mean that in the future we won't revisit this, and that's good. And I think I too thought about, well, what does this do to our GHG reductions? It doesn't. This study doesn't address that one way or another. And then the other thing I think that you did show again is that it really does save a lot of money for the personal customer who has a system where the battery and the solar, work in concert. So that's an important outcome. Then the other thing I want to bring up is something that may change is this campaign promise that Becerra has made, and we don't know if it will come to pass or not, but we do want to continue to align with the state as we can, which is that he will, I think, give its FARA customers a few hours of free energy a day and see how that demand flex might. So that's another thing we might want to be thinking about if that happens in the future. Okay, so Director Martinez Beltran.
Thank you. I'm curious to know, as I was thinking about this, I've talked about this before, and I think about my household. Did you look like at the different types of households? Because when I think about using power, I don't know how well flex is going to work for me. I've got twins that are 12. I've got a 9-year-old. There's, golf. There's cheer. There's softball. There's, so one night I'm doing laundry when I can do laundry. If I'm there from 5, to 7, like I'm using it in prime time. I might be doing laundry at 5 a.m. in the morning the next day. So I think when you have a bigger family, it's really, you can't control, then kids are using, maybe they have a project due and so they're up later. And it's really hard to have that consistency. Whereas if you have maybe, a 2-person home that are both adults, I mean, that's a different, you may be able to have a regular schedule. They may be able to have more control on that. So I'm wondering how you looked at that.
That's really interesting. So the data that we got was from actual customer data in SVCE territory via Lunar. So they have customers in this area. And so we were able to look at actual homes and we then aggregate that up into an average profile that we used to do the margin analysis. We didn't look at specifically what
Who's in the home
and whether they're doing, but that's a really interesting point that you're making.
Yeah, I mean, I would. I think it's a good, an interesting thing to maybe dig into and look at.
Yeah, primarily for most of the load shifting, it is happening through the battery. And so the battery is really optimizing between 4 to 9 p.m. and figuring out what are the hours in that window for the exporting. And so the load shifting isn't really happening outside of that time. It's really those evening hours.
Okay.
Counterintuitive and disappointing. And first of all, Yvonne, to your point about laundry being somewhat inelastic, right? I was told that when I tried in our household to reduce our power usage in the core period or high price period.
£2 Sam.
It was like, you want your laundry done? Okay. So, but it's all about rate arbitrage in my mind. And for residential users, if they can do their own rate arbitrage, that's great. Or if they can shift their load. And at the C&I level, it was almost 20 years ago when there was a company called Load Shed that was helping grocery store chains reduce their load because they could coast with their freezers and other things. There was an immense amount of money that was made years ago with that. But again, rate arbitrage. So this is, and then the other thing at the consumer level is vehicle to grid and being able to use your vehicle as a battery to do that. My question when I looked at your results, I was wondering what sort of rates were you using and how close were they, or were they based on the current rate structure? Because I think the current rate structure is wrong, but because the cost is solar and there's so much during the day, it drives that value down. So you need to couple it with batteries. But can you just talk about that for a moment?
All right. Yeah. So come to your point about rates, totally agree. I think there is something there we have to dig in more to. And so that is one of our next steps, is to think about what is SVC's rate strategy around load shifting to incentivize shifting to times of the day that we would prefer. But that's kind of this balance that we have to do is looking at rate arbitrage for customers and also SVC's power supply costs, and like when do those align, and when and how do we incentivize the behavior that we want. And so yeah, that's something that we're having internal conversations around and want to dig more into.
Yeah, and we're gonna be getting some interesting results soon, at least around the PG&E hourly flex pricing pilot. Preliminary results indicate that customers in that program are really not doing much to respond to hourly price signals, and automation was sort of a foundational tenet of that program. It's struggled for many reasons, one of which has been engaging so-called automation service providers who would be tasked with aligning the rate to the use of a specific load. But generally, it seems to be struggling. On the other hand, EV customers, one of the reasons why the managed EV charging program did not make sense for us to continue is that customers are charging at the right times as is. And so us managing that charging any further than the rate that they're already seeing does not make sense. So it's almost technology, customer type specific.
I'll just make one other comment. I believe that we've got a bottleneck in our transmission capacity, and what we need to do in our service territory is to locate our batteries closer to our load. So we're not having a problem with the transmission bottleneck, so that during the day when everyone's using their own solar, where there's a drop in transmission and demand due to the solar, then we could be transmitting our electricity to local storage inside of our service territory. But anyways, that's a thought.
So we've had a great conversation here, and I think that now it's time for public comment. Would anyone like to speak? Mr. Carney, 3 minutes.
This is a very timely conversation. I have recently been in contact with another environmental advocate named Chuck Russell. I wonder if you've heard from him. You will be soon, because I'll send you the material that he sent me, and I'll send information to Chuck about this meeting, and when it's available on video, he can watch it. He's a very big fan of putting batteries in people's homes to do exactly what you said. But I believe his vision is that the battery systems would be owned by a business which could take tax credits for purchasing the batteries and depreciate them over time. And just like third-party owned solar is a more financially advantageous thing to do than privately owned solar, he thinks there's an advantage there. And I think, to speak to Director Tyson's point, isn't the reason why 200 flexes a year is worse than 50 is because the top 50 are very expensive energy, and by the time you get down to the second 150, it's not that expensive, so you're not saving that much money. Okay, that makes sense to me. Let's see, what else to say about this? I believe it's correct that Ohm Connect, which for years was sending me, turn down your power and you'll get a reward, maybe, is going out of business. Does that imply that flexing without automation isn't really a viable thing and only automation might make it so? And then the last thing I noticed is that the biggest part of your cost stack was the fixed $3 million for running the program. And so therefore, if you had 300 megawatts instead of just 30, presumably that wouldn't go up quite so much. And so you might get closer to a viable business proposition, but only if you can find a way to reduce the big cost of the equipment in the home. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I will bring it back to this is an action. No, this is not. This is just information discussion. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our agenda almost. we also have committee and staff remarks. So are there any committee reports from other members of the Director Klein?
I'll just make a quick comment. Just wanted to tell staff as well as other committee members and the public that we started our EV shuttle system a week and a half ago. So it's real official kickoff, big kickoff. It's kind of a soft launch, but the kickoff is on the 1st of September. But EV shuttle point to point within the city, $3.50 per adult and $1.75 for seniors, for disabled, low income, and high school students. Students over 13 can ride by themselves with their parents', of course, approval. And that's going 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Friday, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 5 p.m. So, and we'll see, it's a 4-year program, and we'll see how that moves forward over the next few years. But we talk about getting people out of their cars and, making sure that, 100% EV, we'll see what effect that has on transportation, which we know is very, very focused on a very big contributor to greenhouse gases. So hopefully we'll see that make a difference in our community. Thanks.
That's great. Anybody else? Anything to share? Staff? Oh, right.
I wanted to make a couple points. First of all, I want to thank SVCE for attending our City of Monte Sereno picnic on the weekend, and there was, I think, good traffic at the booth. So that's thank you for that. Second item is that Benna is coming virtually, I believe, to our city council meeting on Tuesday, the 1st of September. The night before we'll be here and then there, but to talk about how we, the city of Monte Sereno, can advocate for the governor to sign the bill. Pardon? The PCIA, that's the Rogers bill. And then, and then my final comment, Bruce, I was thinking about 2045 and where I'll be in 2045. And also within a block from here, less than a block away, I saw a Waymo. So, and they're coming to Los Gatos, Monte Sereno soon. Anyways, those are my comments.
Great. Okay. Any comments from staff?
No, I didn't mention in my CEO report about the building. We usually bring an update to this. We're really close. We're in the final stretches, getting inspections. A lot of it's going to hinge on the elevator. So, but if all goes well, we will be in our space the second week of September at the latest, and we'll welcome you all there in October again. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Okay. With that, this meeting is adjourned at 12:20.